Can we talk about country and western music?
So it does look to me like it might be 4 o'clock. Well, definitely the 29th of March, and we are the ad hoc committee. So perhaps we could convene. I want to thank everybody for coming. I appreciate the interest and the attendance. Brandon, you're going to lead the show today. Basically, what we're doing today is simply going over some proposed language for a tentative poll on people, how the public feels about sidewalk dining. It's not cast in stone in any way. It's a start point for discussion. Open any suggestions, criticisms, constructive, of course. But honestly, this is just a rough draft that Brandon and I came up with last week, saying, let's get the conversation started on it. So, Brandon?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, I think you put it really well. The goal today is to go through this draft survey and try to get through all 12 questions if we can. Just a couple little housekeeping items. So as the mayor mentioned, this is a draft only. This is not final. The goal of survey is to get everyone a chance at the table to provide some feedback. I'd like to walk away from today with the set of questions sort of settled so we can move on to the next step, which will be the survey being put out online, similar to how the survey has been done for the Forest Theater, which has been really successful. I think the community activities group has seen nearly 500 or so responses to that online survey, which is fantastic. So we're hoping to do something similar. So the draft we're going to be going through today, there'll be some formatting changes. Obviously, have little bubbles that you can fill in and things like that. And the online survey gives you that ability. So we've got 12 questions to go through, which means we're looking at about 5 minutes each if we can get through them. Hopefully some less time, and that'll pick us up some time for the other one. Mr. Mayor and Councilmember Richards, as the ad hoc committee, just to make you aware, we did receive some preliminary feedback from folks when this was mailed out last Friday. One of the thoughts was that the term sidewalk seating is not clear enough, because I know the intention of this survey was to talk about everything. So it could be, a permanent built-in structure with a metal fence around it like we see in downtown Monterey, or all the way down to potentially if someone has interest in, the tables and chairs on the sidewalk. So I think that's one thing that we'll want to look at as staff, or even the ad hoc committee would like to discuss, is how we maybe either better define that word and use a better word, or start the survey with sort of like a preamble that says, here's the goal of this and here's what we mean by sidewalk seating. So those are a couple of options that I came up with based on that feedback. I also did receive some feedback that we should include commercial property owners in question 1, which sort of defines who you are. That's not one that's on there, and I think that's a good addition, so we can add that. And then adding the type of seating to a couple of the questions that are on a sliding scale that talk about everything from whether it's the built-in seating or, just tables and chairs, so that each of those questions can be answered for each of those types. So that was some of the preliminary feedback that we received. With that, if you would like, Mr. Mayor, I can share my screen and we can just start with question 1 and work our way through everything else.
To me.
Okay. Give me just 1 second here. Okay, can everyone see that okay?
I just might want to say that to your point about sidewalk seating, you and I did kind of struggle with how to define this, wanting to get away from parklets and not indicating that we were fixed on one style of dining at all. So that was kind of the conundrum you and I were suffering through last week when we talked about this. So if anybody's got a suggestion on some more broader terminology that encapsulates what we're talking about, that's fine with me. I just, it was hard to describe what we were talking about when we really don't know what it is we want to see.
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, I think that one solution that I would suggest would be maybe, starting with that sort of preamble or a note at the very beginning that says, here's what we mean by sidewalk seating. It's all sort of all encompassing. So don't feel limited in your responses or something along those lines.
I think that's a good idea, especially going into the questions themselves. It kind of better frames the questions. Looking for any input on that topic. Tim?
No, I think right, that's perfect. I was thinking along the same lines that You want to have some sort of goal preamble, in front of this. And I think, you pretty much addressed, what the goal should be there, Brandon. Sidewalk seating is, I think that just kind of my preliminary thought on that kind of covers what we're talking about. It leaves it wide open enough to, cover permanent, bump outs, whatever, infrastructure requirements, as well as just a table and chair, in front of a restaurant without any, major modifications. So, kind of see how it goes, but just for now, that kind of works for me.
While we're talking about the preamble,
You're echoing really bad.
yeah, is that better? Okay.
Much better.
It doesn't address if this survey is asking about for the now or for the future. So someone answering these might be answering in this current pandemic environment, how they feel, versus once we're past the pandemic and allowing indoor dining, then how do you feel? So I don't know if you address that in questions or in preamble. So that was just my other.
That's a great point. Thank you. That is not included in there. So I think Mr. Mayor and Councilmember Richards, if you feel the same way that this is for the future post-pandemic, I think we should make that clear up front.
I agree completely. Yeah, I've always assumed this is for the future as moving towards permanent.
No, that's a great point, Amy. I think I'm along the same lines that would really clarify in the preamble that, something to the effect that when, indoor dining is back to normal type of thing, to give everybody a feel for, what the survey is about is the future, not the current. I agree with that.
Richard, are you trying to say something then, Graham?
Yeah, I'd like, let me turn off both the phone and inside. I think people know what they're voting for. They should know what temporarily. Is it for now? Is it for when things are fully opened up? I've been speaking to people, and the support for continued outdoor parklets is temporary. It's like, oh, we should give the restaurant 6 months, a year and a half, 2 years to recover. But most of the people I've talked to would see it sunsetting. So we really need to be very clear about what we're asking people about. Are we asking people about sidewalk seating, restaurants, tables on the sidewalk or taking up parking spaces, parklets? So that's my suggestion. We should be very clear about what we're asking people and what the time frame is, and what we're talking about. And it can include everything, but we should be clear about that, and maybe have questions which distinguish between those alternatives. Thanks.
Graham?
I think the specificity is very important. And so I would agree with Amy that if we're looking at this as a permanent program, then that should be articulated in the preamble and continue to be articulated throughout the document. And then secondarily, when I see the word sidewalk seating, I think it's just seating on the sidewalk. Does that include parklets, bump outs? What does that really mean? So I think the specificity is really important. You might have 3 different columns: sidewalk, in parking places, or in other locations, and have people check off which ones they prefer. But I think that specificity is really important.
It would seem to me that, Brandon, we have some pretty good consensus on the preamble. And then moving on to question number 1, then the suggestion that we add commercial property owners to that list seems apropos. Is there anybody else wanting to add anybody else to that list? Question number 1.
Can everyone see that okay up on the screen? Okay, good. Tried to make it as big as I can. There we go.
On that, Brandon, on number 1, can they answer check off like 2 bubbles?
Yeah, well, so the concept here, and you have to try to imagine this in in an online form where you're clicking buttons and things like that. But yeah, theoretically, you could click more than one. The idea is, here, hotel business operator, then you would have an option for selecting whether you're a resident hotel business operator or a non-resident hotel business operator. And then in the second one, so for all these, that's why it says resident, non-resident afterwards in parentheses. Just doing this in a Word document as a mock-up, this was the best way to do it. But when it gets onto the actual survey online where you're clicking the buttons, you could click one of those two. We've also included other business operator with a write-in option, and then other with a write-in option as well. I tried to make them exclusive, so hopefully one of these categories would fit somebody. And that's why I added the resident and non-resident for all the operators. So if you're just a regular resident, not that that's regular or bad, but if you're just a resident alone and you don't operate a business or a restaurant or a hotel or anything like that, you would just click resident of Carmel-by-the-Sea.
I assume you might want to put in part-time resident, second homeowner, as they're a very important constituency for the businesses. And I don't know if that distinguishes, but full-time resident versus as I say, part-time. And we have a lot of 5-month and 28-day residents in Carmel-by-the-Sea.
Okay, so I'll look to the ad hoc members on that. Do you want a part-time and a full-time? And if so, what would you want to define part-time at? Less than 6 months per year?
Good question. I would say maybe resident versus property owner.
What about voter versus non-voter?
Maybe sounds a little political.
Yeah. I don't mean it to be political. I just mean it to be a.
I mean,
yeah, I know.
They could have like maybe a second homeowner versus primary resident, something like that.
Yeah, that
sounds good.
Thanks, Tim. Thanks for bailing me out of that one.
Or if it's not that important to the subsequent analysis, you could just say resident, parentheses, full-time or second home of Carmel-by-the-Sea. As I say, I don't know that the distinction between the two, I just don't want to, people say, well, I shouldn't take this. I'm not a full-time resident. Anyway.
All right.
I mean, so I don't want to go down this wormhole, but does it matter if you're an employee, if you are a resident and you work in downtown? I don't know how specific you want to get. But.
Well, I think, if I could offer a little bit on that, I think that, when you think about adding, categories of people, think if there's any benefit to separating them out from an information perspective. And I don't know if there is at that level of detail, unless the group thinks otherwise. But really, we're just trying to get a sense of where they're coming from and their opinions, versus being able to track every single kind of person.
Gotcha.
Well, Bobby wrote up something. We are leaving out employees. You have to be an operator. And do we want to know what employee? And this is an honest question. Do we want to know what employees think about this, who work downtown? So, but that's left out. It's all operators.
Well, that's a good question. I would say we would probably want to know their opinion.
Okay.
And I don't want to be really restrictive on this. I mean, it's going to keep the dialogue as open as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So, Brandon, we're actually kind of going to be here till about 7 o'clock if this is the rate. And we don't really have to get through all this. We can have another meeting next week if we want. This is an ad hoc committee. We can have a meeting whenever we want. So, but we've now got a preamble conceptualized. We've got questions for number one, description of a respondent, and pretty good. I haven't heard anything I really object to. It's just a matter of wordsmithing it in there. So then on a scale, why don't you take us into then number two, Brandon?
So number two, then, the concept here was seeing how consistent people thought that the sort of sidewalk seating dining, which will now be described in the preamble as sort of the overall concept of seating in the downtown area public ways, if that's consistent with the character of Carmel-by-the-Sea. And this was one of the questions where I got some previous feedback that there should essentially be a line for each of the potential types, like the built-ins, the tables and chairs only, the temporary parklets like we have right now, so people can speak to each one of those individually. So I think that was a good suggestion, and we can do that here, and that'll make sure we're getting the directed feedback we're looking for.
So instead of just a thumbs up or a thumbs down, you get a medley of options.
Correct. Each with the 1 to 5 scale, so you'll get to kind of tease out, is there one that seems more acceptable to folks as being consistent than others?
Hey, so Brandon, just a thought on this. Do you think it might be more, we might get better response if we narrowed the numbers down so that, like, as I'm looking at this, a 3 would kind of be average. Let's see, not at all consistent, fully, it would be consistent. Would it be better to maybe just have 4 choices to force the answers to be, either more on the non-consistent or more on the consistent versus just having, kind of an average? I feel it's consistent, or does that matter? Just a thought there.
I don't really have too much of an opinion. I mean, the 1 to 5 scale is pretty standard because it does give people a way to sort of, say, I don't care on this one, so do what you want. To not, because if they don't have a choice if they don't have that middle choice, then, and they truly don't care, they're going to impact the decision one way or the other. And if they really don't want to impact the decision on that one, they don't have an option out of it.
Any other thoughts? I think I'd rather stay with the 1 through 5 personally, but.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but 1 to 5 seems easy.
So then, Mr. Mayor, the next 2 are both about caps. The first one, number 3, is if there's a program, should a cap be placed on the total number of spaces citywide? So that would be within the city of Carmel, wherever it's allowed. And then number 4 is, should there be a cap placed on, streets and blocks? So between, 2 endpoints, so you don't end up with, them next to each other. So it's sort of 2 questions about caps, number 3 and number 4.
Thoughts on that, members?
Well, you say number of spaces, but we're conflating chairs and tables on the sidewalk with parking places taken over. So it needs to be clearer. And also, it's not saying whether it's permanent or not. So I would say if sidewalk seating, if park is allowed permanently, should there be a cap placed on the total number of parking spaces allowed citywide, or or a cap on the number of sidewalk seats that are allowed citywide. But this is ambiguous.
Well, I think, that's good feedback.
It doesn't permanent or current.
Yeah, I think for what might be helpful for this is I think we should just assume that this whole survey now is about permanent. I think that was what
Excellent.
the preamble is going to do. So let's just assume that for all these questions. So that note's definitely been taken. And then it sounds like maybe there's, what I'm hearing is there's an interest in possibly treating this one like we were talking about treating the previous one, where you've got your permanent built-in, you've got your temporary parklets, you've got your tables and chairs. So asking the cap question for all those different types as well.
Well, my question on this was, should it be the number of permits that are issued? That would relate to the size of the restaurant, and then not so much the number of spaces themselves that it was taking up. We want to limit the number of people that can actually get a permit, or is that going to be done geographically, or how is that going to work?
And I think one of the things to consider, Mr. Mayor and Councilmember Richards, is with a survey like this so early on in the process, remembering that we're going to have a long ways to go if we do pursue this program to really dial in some of this stuff. So at this point, we're really trying to take a pulse on the general concept of capping it. Is it free market where as many people want them can have them? Or do we want to be able to control at some level, we don't know maybe exactly how yet, but we want to control at some level how many of these would be out there regardless of what they look like. So that was originally where this question was coming from, just to take a pulse on does the city in general have an appetite for putting some sort of limit on these if it becomes a thing that moves forward?
Bobby, you cogitating?
Yeah, that is just such a tough question. I'm most of the time I'm for free enterprise, but I can't I just can't see every restaurant in town. I can see every restaurant in town wanting these. If we were so inclined to give them to them, the amount of seats that we'd be adding to our inventory would just be out of control. And so I'm struggling with it. And just to go back, and I hate to go backwards, but I see there's 4 options, right? There's sidewalk dining, there's sidewalk with street dining, there's nothing at all, or there's bump out. Is there something else that I'm missing? And that's what we kind of have to get our head around, is what is the barometer of the people in this town? What do they want? That would be where I'd want to go with this survey, is finding out what they want.
Bobby, when you say bump out, you mean a parklet in a parking space? Is that a bump out?
For me, a bump out would be more of a sort of a sidewalk in a parking space, allowing the restaurant to have tables against their building.
Oh, and then you route the pedestrians around it into a parking space?
Yeah. And that way the sidewalk would only take up maybe 4 or 5 feet width in a parking spot. Remember, it would kind of alleviate that pinch point that we're getting so badly on places like Dolores and 6th Street. But so back to your question, Mayor, I just don't know about a cap. How would we, the first one in line gets it?
The limitation on the number of hotel rooms in town. Or is there a lottery system that we could use? And a preliminary lottery system or something like that? Could it be done on a trial basis? Allow 5 or 6, something like that. I mean, it's a wide open question. You're absolutely right, Bobby.
I could see this benefiting some restaurants greatly and crushing others.
Well, we still haven't gotten to the part we've talked about whether or not there's going to be a fee involved. And so that's going to depend on, if there's a fee involved, then it's going to change the number of people that are going to want to do it. It's that simple.
Well, once again, Todd, just like I said, that
what's the fee? So
if there is a fee involved, then there's some restaurants that can easily afford that fee, and there's other ones that won't be able to afford it. Therefore, the ones that can afford it, that's what I mean by crushing the other ones. And that's what I would hate to see happen, because we are such a unique, we pride ourselves in all these unique style of restaurants.
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, if I could jump in, I think this level of detail is wonderful, and I think this is what comes sort of like in the round 2 after a survey like this, where you have these conversations broadly. So let's say we send this survey out, 1,000 people participate, 999 say don't charge the restaurants a fee. You got a really clear answer there. If it's the other way and they say, yeah, we all think the restaurant should be charged a fee, then it becomes the question of how much is that fee? Where's the cutoff point? And same question about the cap. If everyone says, yeah, we really feel like there should be a cap, then it becomes the next business of work becomes, how do we get to that cap? Is there a lottery? As the mayor started to go down some of the more detail, is it a lottery? Is it a first come, first serve? Is it, is it a beauty contest? How do you do that? Mm-hmm. And I don't mean that in the sense of like a true beauty contest. That's in the planning and land use world. That's what we call those, is who has the best proposal, essentially.
We're not going to get a harassment charge against you out of this, Brandon. We're fine with your selection. But I don't want to presuppose the answer. I mean, that's what we're doing right now, is we're getting ahead of ourselves. As Brandon brought up, we're starting to second guess how the answers are going to be. So I think we just want to get the question out there, and then we can take that back and digest it and figure out where we want to go from there.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. That is sort of what I was saying. You said it much more succinctly than I did.
On the other hand, just putting out there so vaguely, should there be a cap? I mean, at some point, of course, there should be a cap. You can't let a restaurant say, I want 10 parking spaces. So you may not want to include that question right now if we don't have enough direction about even where we're thinking, because most people would say, yes, of course, there should be some sort of a cap.
So maybe the question needs to be more focused on, should there be a cap on the number of businesses that are allowed to have outdoor spaces?
Yes, and should there be a cap on how many, and I wouldn't use the word spaces unless you're talking about parking spaces. But
I thought should the parking, or should the restaurant be only constrained to its street frontage? That was one of the things. Is it shouldn't be, you shouldn't be able to take over, anything more than you actually front on the street. you shouldn't impact anybody else's properties.
Right. So exactly, should there be a cap on how many
Operate.
restaurants or a limit?
Exactly.
And should there be a cap on how much frontage is used?
Exactly.
Is this kind of a loaded question here? That it probably is. That back to what Brandon was saying, maybe this question is too soon in the game. That if everybody says no, it should be wide open, there shouldn't be any caps. By the time that we get to really exploring this, there probably are not everybody's going to be able to participate in it. I wouldn't think there's going to probably be some constraints, like you were saying, Mayor. Your seating doesn't end up being in front of the restaurant or whatever. So maybe those questions are better left for a later time.
Yeah, that's certainly an option. I mean, Mr. Mayor and Councilmember Richards, if you would like, we can just strike questions 3 and 4 because there's almost certainly going to be another round of outreach and public involvement. So maybe these do come later.
I would tend to agree with that.
Agree either. Simple is good. Short is powerful.
I may suggest that we do a show and tell here again to eliminate ambiguity. We may want to structure this with pictures so people know what we're talking about. I'm learning about some of these, what you're considering as alternatives right now, and I've been pretty much involved. So, I mean, maybe this survey needs to start off, this is what we're talking about, a parklet, if you want to keep using that. I think that's a good expression because it means parking place. This is sidewalk seating. This is a bump out. You can take a picture of Alvarado Street. Let people know what it is they're looking at, and then you can ask the questions. You were talking about columns. Well, the best thing is a picture or a couple of pictures to say what we're talking about, and then ask the questions about them.
Which is worth 1,000 words, apparently. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay, that's good feedback. I think we can find some simple diagrams like we do in our design guidelines and things like that.
Design guidelines instead of actual graphics, maybe. I mean, I don't mean an actual picture. There was some adverse reaction to many pictures shown of Monterey last time.
I was just thinking a simple overhead of here's a sidewalk, here's a parking space. Yeah, I think that would be easily done.
All righty.
That takes us to number 5. Essentially, the question is, should there be a uniform closure time for all of these outdoor spaces, regardless of the individual businesses? So, if a restaurant has a use permit that allows them to stay open until 11:30 and the uniform closure time is 10 for the parklet, then the parklet or whatever the outdoor seating space in the public area is would close at 10, and their indoor restaurant would remain open until whatever their use permit allowed.
I think there's some logic to that for me, actually, because outside dining does have more of a noise impact than indoor dining. It doesn't preclude the indoor dining piece, which is what the restaurant was originally allowed to have. So I don't really have a problem with that.
Yeah, I would leave it like that too, because it's just for enforcement purposes. It's so much easier on the police force.
Okay. Oh, wow. We just picked up a bunch of time on that one. Okay.
Good.
Number 6. If sidewalk seating dining is allowed, should spaces be connected to the building or separated from the building on a sidewalk? This is the conversation we've had a couple of times about how they're physically structured. Are they attached to the building so that if there's a bump out, the pedestrians walk around? Or is it a split so the sidewalk goes between the seating area and the restaurant, so servers and guests are going to have to cross each other?
I think that we understand that, being involved in this, but for the average person taking this, they would be confused with that.
Yeah, I think that's where the pictures may come in.
Probably goes back to Tim's graphic then suggestion. I think it was Tim that said that. That would be good.
Okay.
Well, if you do use it, instead of saying spaces, say should eating areas or something like that. And then also I would say, connected, separated, or depends on layout. Maybe it depends on what street you're on and what the situation is there.
Brandon, we pretty much all agreed on number 5 that it should be a set time. So does that even need to be put on the survey, to be honest?
Well, yeah, I guess I'll defer to the ad hoc committee. This is not a survey for the ad hoc committee or the group here. This is a survey that's meant to go out to the entire general public to get their take on it. So we're not trying to answer these questions today.
Correct. So, I mean, if we kind of all agree that it should be a set time, do we still need it to go to everyone? Let me ask you that question. Or should it be? I don't know. I really don't know that answer.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with the question being out there, honestly, Todd. I mean, the other councils opined on it momentarily, but that doesn't mean it's cast in stone. So,
Okay,
yeah,
all right.
Brandon, I would recommend you.
Mike, Richard. Let's let Rich Pepe go.
Oh, sorry, Rich.
Yeah, I wanted to concur with Amy Herzog. I think the use of the word space here and there may be confusing to the survey taker, because I think people are thinking about space as like a parking space, where really you're talking, I think most of these questions talk about sidewalk seating / dining. So I think I agree with Amy that word space gets confusing in the second half of these sentences, whether that means tables or what did Amy say?
Seating area.
Seating area.
Seating area. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
Yeah, that's a great point. I took that note right away because I agreed. I think, having just written this, but it was fine for me, but spaces is very confusing if you're trying to tell between parking or not. Okay, I got the note on 6.
Yeah, hold on. Richard's trying to say something. Richard.
I was just going to suggest on that sentence, on that one, the one about the one about timing, about the hours, that you add that sentence that you told us, say, which means that even though a restaurant can stay open to 11:30 indoors, outdoor dining would be restricted to a earlier hour, such as 10 a.m. p.m. Then people would know what you're asking them.
Got it. Okay. Number 7, if sidewalk seating and dining is allowed, should the city charge for some sort of annual fee? So this is the question, if people think that a fee should be charged annually for those that choose to utilize the public right of way for seating.
To me.
Yeah, that's straightforward. We just leave it at that. That's straightforward.
Yes or no question.
Yep. And then should wine tasting rooms be allowed to have a sidewalk seating space?
Well, same thing here. I would expand on sidewalk seating and most of them have seating right now in the parking spaces. So I would add that in as the options.
So how do you mean, Amy? So this, again, remembering this is supposed to be, post-pandemic, we don't have the temporary structures out there anymore. So there's just meant to be, should they have any sort of outdoor in the public area seating?
Yeah, public way seating space,
Okay.
Sidewalk or parking spot.
Yeah, okay. And I think that running, I've taken the note that, cleaning up some of the language about sidewalk seating, what it means, I think that's going to help with questions like this to make it a little bit more clear.
Yeah, because, as far as wine tasting goes, there would be the possibility for them to have outside seating on site. I don't want to preclude that from being discussed. All righty.
Okay.
Do we know if their ABC is the ABC going to be fine with wine tasting rooms? Do we know that, Brandon?
They haven't really had an issue with it to date when we've talked to them. We can do some more research on that, but they didn't seem to have a problem with it as long as we don't as a city.
Right. Well, I know that we can do it with the restaurants. I just didn't know if there was going to be some sort of a ruling that they have to have food now, or what that looks like.
Yeah, I don't know, but that's I'll add that as a sort of follow-up item.
Yeah. So, Rich, your mic is open. If you're not trying to say something, if you could mute your mic, that'd be nice. And then phone number ending in 35. Are you trying to say something?
Doesn't look like it, Mr. Mayor.
All righty. Right.
Okay, and then number 9, should businesses with existing private outdoor space, so these are spaces obviously not in the public right of way. So if you already have an existing private outdoor space, should you be allowed to apply for a sidewalk seating space or whatever it ends up being called?
Fair question. I'm not going to try to answer it. It's a fair question.
Okay. Next one, on a scale 1 to 5, essentially, how concerned are you about the loss of parking in the downtown area? So this is just solely focused on parking. And again, this would be, based on the comments we received so far, this would then be lined out for each of the types that Councilmember Richards was talking about. And so there'd be sort of like multiple lines here, but this gets to the concern about parking.
To me.
Okay. Doing a lot better on the home stretch here than we're on the front end.
Don't jinx us, Brandon.
Sorry. There you go. We're good. Okay, number 11, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being most severe, how severely do you think sidewalk seating program would impact each of the following areas of the city? So then we went and tried to pick out some of the areas that we've heard that people are most concerned about to see how concerned they are about those areas.
The question then to this is there something we should be adding from this to this? Because it seems to me maybe there is something else that I'm missing here. These are the ones you and I thought were most discussed and cussed over the past few months, but perhaps there's something else that's of concern.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can ask them to please list any other concerns you might have, and then you can include that in a follow-up survey. The thing on design and aesthetics, these are all negatives. This is, from not being too bad to being awful. But I believe one of the reasons to have to make this permanent, and I would say in a highly attenuated and carefully designed fashion, is because it adds to the appeal and the aesthetics of the city at a certain point. And at a certain point it becomes too much. But so I don't know. You could have a question about the positive. I mean, everybody knows it's good for the restaurants, but is it good? So I'm just saying that.
One thing we could do, Mr. Mayor and Councilmember Richards, that's a great point, because we did structure the rest of the questions with an opportunity essentially to say, not at all concerned. So here we could add a 0, which would mean, will not impact negatively or something like that.
Well, what if you said how positively or negatively do you feel the following areas would be impacted? And then have one scale be positive impact and then one end be negatively impact. And then they can, because the way it's phrased now is biased. I mean, you're putting out there severe, the word severe twice, which is pretty negative.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, you're right. This is a little redundant in the word severe.
Redundant school of redundancy.
Yeah, or say how important, rank these by importance or something.
So I think I understand. I think Amy might be onto something there with restructuring it so that how will the program impact these areas, and then it'd be on the 0 end would be positively, and then on the 5 end would be negatively. So either one's technically an impact. So it's either positive impact or negative impact. So the question's more about impact versus whether it's how severely it's impacting. So I think we can restructure it that way if the ad hoc committee's comfortable with that approach.
I hate to be a Bobby.
No, whatever you think. I'm trying to get, is there going to be any negative impact with the addition of so many seats in the village, with so many more seats in the village? That's what I'm trying to figure out, if that will impact the city or certain restaurants with so many seats added. And I don't think we can get that in there. Maybe it's a moot point, but.
If you're asking, Bobby, about whether it negatively affects other restaurants, maybe we should leave the restaurant association to address it. I know we have we have Rich on, we have Ken Spilfogel, but is that the question? Is it?
Well, yeah, I just something rings in my head of when there was a restaurant that wanted to come into the plaza a few years ago, and a lot of the restaurateurs were up in arms saying we can't add this many new seats to our little village, and yet we are adding that many new seats to our little village, and so I don't know if that will negatively impact us or not. With whether I don't know.
Are you speaking a little bit towards like the idea of like cannibalizing business? From others, maybe.
I guess it would be cannibalizing the business, and so I don't know if that's a negative impact. I just this keeps running through my head, and so maybe the restaurateurs can speak to that.
Battle it out on their own. Tim, were you trying to say something earlier?
Hello, this is Bashar. Can I speak?
Certainly.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. I think the question about positive impact, I think it's a very important question. And I would recommend if we have a question on its own, how positive you think this will be addition to the Carmel-by-the-Sea. And you can start from 0 to 5. You can start from -5 to +5, and this will be like how people thinking and going in the negative or in the positive, and in a standalone question by itself. Thank you.
Yeah, gang, where I was going with this was I was thinking more along the lines of on how important are these factors to you? In other words, because if we say like how do you think the program will be impacted by the design and aesthetics to the city? Well, kind of all depends on what the design looks like. So I was, I'm kind of looking at this from that perspective of, what's really important to you as a business person, as a resident, et cetera. How would you rank them to give us or to give Brandon and team an idea as to what, what's important? And maybe, the impact of it has the same effect, but I'm getting kind of hung up with this design and aesthetics of the city. Somebody trying to fill this out, not knowing what that's going to look like, but saying, yeah, that's an important factor that I want to be considered.
Amy, you've got your hand up.
Yes, it doesn't exactly go with what Tim was saying, but I would recommend you add something, if you keep it in this format, about appeal of the destination to visitors. Something like that, because, that would be something that would potentially, like right now, this is going to be potentially a lot of negative potential feedback, but I know a lot of the restaurants and the hotels would say that having more outdoor dining options would be appealing to potential visitors.
I think we wanted to incorporate.
So yeah, and I don't know if it belongs in this category or not, and maybe it gets put in a different question, but marketability of the destination, just coming from my viewpoint.
Brandon, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm staring at my paper because I understand exactly what Amy's saying. I'm trying to think if there's a way to cram that into this picture. It almost kind of goes along with Bashar's question of adding a new question about how positive this might be for the village on a -5 to 5 scale, which I think is not a bad idea.
Hey, Brandon, what if you said 3 was neutral, and 2 would be severely, or it has a negative impact, 1 has a severely negative impact, 4 would be very little impact, 5 would be very positive, and you left 3 as the neutral.
Yeah, that's exactly where my head at was starting to go, trying to blend what Amy and Bashar said. I think, Councilmember Richards and Mayor Potter on this question, since it is a potential like sort of like yin and yang, dark and light, positive, negative answer, maybe we go with a -5 to a 5 scale on this one. So everything in the negative numbers is a negative impact in their opinion. 0 would be, as you really well pointed out, Councilman Richards, sort of like neutral, don't think there'll be one way or the other. And then all the positive numbers would be the positive impact. So then this question would have a little bit different numbering scale than the other ones, but then it would help us tease out a little bit more where people are at from a positive or a negative perspective.
You could separate it into a yin question and a yang question. You could have, these are some of the positive effects this may have on our city, bring in more visitors. We residents, we like having outdoor dining to a degree. So have a positive question and you agree, disagree, agree, and then you can have all the negatives in its own question, agree, disagree.
I think one of the risks with that in trying to write a Switzerland survey is that if we start from saying something is a negative impact or a positive impact already, then it's sort of biasing. And I think that's the problem with this question as written. I wrote it as a flawed question to begin with because it already is biased as a negative thing. So I think letting people tell us whether they think an impact is positive or negative, like more visitors to the village. I think a lot of people think that more visitors to the village is a positive thing, but there are also a lot of people that think that's a negative thing. So then they can tell us what they think the impact is, whether it's positive or negative, with that -5 to 5 schedule.
So you would be adding some lines here.
Correct.
Yeah, that
Correct.
would do it.
Yeah.
That would do it.
Well, then along the lines of what Richard just said, maybe you might want to add something that's a little more focused toward residents that says willingness to dine out. Some residents might be more inclined to dine out even well into the future if they have more outdoor dining options.
That's my wife. She will not be dining indoors for at least 6 months or maybe more.
So Amy, you're suggesting just a new standalone question that said, would you be more inclined to dine in the future if there is permanent outdoor seating?
You don't even have to do a separate question, but it could go into this, the negative, positive, willingness to dine out.
Okay.
Are you more or less willing to dine out if you have outdoor dining options?
Mm-hmm.
Same thing as marketability of the destination, more or less marketable in your opinion.
Again, we don't have to necessarily, we're on no timeline here. We could go ahead and knock this up and get back to this next week. We could get back again next Monday and have a go at it if everybody's inclined. Actually, I think we've got a council action Monday and Tuesday, but we could certainly do it next week and go back and have one final run at it.
Yeah, I can turn this around pretty quickly, Mr. Mayor. I think especially since we're about to get to number 12, I can try to infuse all these comments that have been really great into a redraft, and we can come back, middle of late next week. We do have Planning Commission next Wednesday. Oh no, I'm sorry, we don't actually. So no, scratch that. So next Wednesday would work if we want to.
Next Wednesday, as long as I'm functioning, I do have my shot on Tuesday, but I'm sure I'll be fine. Yeah.
Well, I think 12, unless anyone has any thoughts about how this is written, it's just your generic, please give us other thoughts.
Yeah, I have one thought here, Brandon. Thank you very much for doing this. Excellent job. Thank you for taking the time. Really appreciate it. And I think that would be good to maybe, redraft it, and I don't know who you would send it out to, but or if we would just have another meeting to review it at that time, but I would go for that. I think we're pretty much done, with the input, and again, thanks a lot. I think you did a great job on this.
I'd agree. So Bobby, you good with getting back together next Wednesday?
Yes. And Mayor, I think something just popped up on my screen saying somebody raised their hand. Is that right, Brandon?
I did.
It's like Melinda Rain has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, forgive me, I missed the first few minutes of this, and you may have addressed it already, but my question was who this questionnaire is going to go to. You mentioned operators, and I'm just wondering you mentioned in a previous meeting that it would go to residents and possibly property owners, retailers. So could you
All
clarify that for me? Sorry.
All of the above. It's a massive global outreach. May even take some overseas input. No, but no, it's intended to be very inclusive, both commercial, residential, everybody. And and actually, one of the polls I was looking at the other day, I don't remember what it was, but said that you're only entitled to respond if you're a resident of a certain area. It wasn't for us. It was some other organization I'm a member of. A rail committee. And they said they only wanted to know from the people who had the station that was going to be located in their town. They didn't want to know about anybody who was riding on the train. Seemed kind of selective to me. So, yeah. No, we'd want to be as globally out. If you want to suggest anybody else that you think we should have in there, Melinda, that'd be great. It's a matter of how can we outreach it.
Yeah, I was just
it
saying,
sounds like you're covered. Yeah.
well, how are you going to reach the businessman? I mean, I'm involved, but I can tell you most of the retailers and people are pretty insular. They drive in, they run their businesses, and they go home. You might, a flyer, a one-page piece of paper handed into the businesses might greatly increase. Businesses are concerned, but they're not necessarily online, and you won't have their emails.
Yeah, we've got a very generous offer already from the Carmel Chamber of Commerce to help us get in touch with the business owners as much as they can. We plan on using our website to have an online survey like we've done for the Forest Theater. I've already coordinated with the Community Services and Activities Division, so when this is done, we can visit the farmers markets and be there and hand out surveys. We plan on trying to canvass as much as we possibly can. I mean, there's no such thing as a perfect survey or completely inclusive survey, but we're going to do our darndest to get as many people involved in this as we can.
I think
Graham and Tim are here as resident representatives of the CRA. They'll be good about getting information out. I'm sure that'll be great.
I think the Pine Cone will probably report on this as well. And so what I was going to say exactly, the CRA, the website should have it.
No, I'd be in support of what Richard said in terms of having a flyer and, going around to the different businesses in town that aren't a member of the chamber or aren't as involved. So I think that's a good idea.
Good.
And from the CRA's perspective, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, whatever we can do to, put this in people's hands or inboxes, we're happy to do that.
Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate the input today, especially around the prologue. I think that's really significant when you talk about something that was missing from this proposal. Really does need some sort of lead in and some explanation of what's before them as we go through the questions themselves. So we took a little criticism, Brandon, for getting something out there, but that's the way it goes, and got to start the discussion with something. So I think we did a good job today.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon.
Is it possible maybe if the Pine Cone does do an article on it, maybe they could link to a website or to the city's website and it'd be the survey, like a Survey Monkey type thing? Would that be possible, maybe, Brandon?
That's exactly what we're planning on doing with the survey and then that's how they ran the one for Forest Theater. Was it's a link through like a MailServe or a MailChimp or one of those. And so absolutely, we'll coordinate with the Pine Cone. I can call Mary Schley once we get something and ask if they're able to help us out with that. And then we would obviously put the link in the newspaper.
The other group we might want to touch as well is Yes for Carmel. So they have not as an extensive group as we have at the CRA, but there's a lot of folks that have been in town for a long time that are part of that group. Merv Sutton, Cindy Lloyd, folks like that.
Good idea. Absolutely. All righty. Well, despite our suspicious start, we've done very well today. So thank you all very much. Much appreciated.
So Mayor Potter, you'd like to meet next Wednesday? Is that next Wednesday at 4 o'clock?
Does that work for you, Bobby?
I believe so. You check.
Okay, calendar here says it's written in. So yeah, I've got it down.
Yeah, it's good for me.
Wednesday, April 5th.
April 7th. Wait a minute.
April 7th.
April 7th.
Oh, sorry. I was looking at May. Okay, got it.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate it. Well done.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for all the participants. Appreciate it.
Yeah. Much.
Okay. Have a good night.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.